Hi, and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. If you are new to my channel, I hope that you'll take a moment to like and subscribe and comment below. Maybe you could comment where you're located. I love to read all of the comments and would love to know where you're from, what city, state, province, country. That would be fun to see where you're located. And today, what I want to share with you is how I choose scraps to make the scrappy quilts that I create. And so I've had many of you have questioned that. You've sent me emails, you've asked me in my YouTube channel, and so I want to share with you today how I pull scraps from my stash to create my scrappy quilts. And I'm going to be showing you scrap quilts. I'm also going to be showing you scrap blocks, and I'm going to first of all give you an overview of how I get my scraps cut, sorted, and organized. That's so important. So if you're new to my channel and you haven't seen my Speedy Solutions book set or my Speedy Solutions video that teaches you and walks you through how to get your scrap stash cut, sorted, organized, and ready to go, I'm going to link the video below in the description box as well as the book set. This book is my techniques book. It teaches you everything you need to know to get those scraps cut, sorted, organized, and ready to use. And then this is a corresponding patterns book. Between the two books, you get all of the techniques plus a total of 17 scrappy patterns, and you will just have fun creating beautiful quilts from your own personal scrap stash. Now, let's take a look at some of this. I have quite a bit sitting on my tabletop here, and I want to share it with you. So when you go through my video, which corresponds to this book, and you walk through and get all your scrap stash cut, sorted, and organized, I teach you how to cut up squares, cut up strips, and cut up templates. Those are all parts and pieces that you truly do need in your scrap stash. And as you can see here, I have squares starting from 1.5 inches up to 6 inches here. And I've just got an assortment of them here, which shows you this was actually a pile of wrinkled fabric, and I pressed it and I was able to cut it up, and it's just so much more organized. It takes up so much less room. So I encourage you to either follow the book or the video and make sure you get your scrap stash all cut, sorted, organized, and ready. Now, when I talk about cutting up my scraps, I don't necessarily cut up fat quarters or yardage. What I do cut up are remnants of previous projects, and you may have seen a big tote of mine which was just filled with remnants of previous projects. That's the kind of thing that I cut up. I do store my fat quarters and my yardage and my backings in different areas in my quilt room, and I've shared that with you before, and I can certainly do another video on that if you'd like. One of the things that we're going to touch on today is when I store my squares, when I store my strips, and when I store my templates, I like to put them into containers like this where they have a lid so that they are secure. And I have always had my quilting studio in my basement, and I've never had an issue with bugs, but I just never want to worry about that. So I always make sure that I have my stash in these closed containers. The reason I mention that is because when I'm scrapping up my stash, I do press it with either a magic sizing or a Mary Ellen's Best Press, something like that. And that is basically a sugar-based product, which does attract bugs. So that's one reason why I do like to keep them in here, but I've just never had any issues. But that's something to keep in mind. When I do go through and pull scraps from my stash, I look at my patterns and I identify per block what sizes I need and what values I need, whether it's light, medium, and dark. Let's say now these all look like they're 2-inch squares, and I've gone to my stash and I have pulled what I needed in the way of light squares and medium squares for that block. And when I go to my scrap stash then, let's say I need 12 light squares that are 2 inches for each block. And let's say I want to make 4 of these blocks, that means I need 48 of those 2-inch light squares. When I go to my stash, And although these are 2.5, we're going to pretend that they're 2 inches. But when I go to my stash, I don't literally count it out. I just go to the lights or the mediums or the darks, and I just grab what's in there. I just grab a stack, which I think might look like 48 squares. I'll take an empty container to my stash. I'll identify what I need per block times the number of blocks that I plan to make, and go ahead and grab whatever I need. So if I needed 48 light 2-inch squares and 48 medium 2-inch squares, that's what I would do. Now this is kind of messed up. As I'm in and out of my stash, quite often they do get messed up. So there are times when I like just to take each of the containers while I'm watching TV and just get them arranged back in light, medium, and darks so that it's easy for me to pull large sections of them and then take everything to my sewing machine and start sewing blocks. So today, everything I'm going to be showing you, it's either one of the blocks from my 52-week Scrappy Block series, which I will link below. There's a whole playlist of 52 different blocks that I've created for you, with free PDFs included in each of those videos. So you can literally, if you choose, let me grab my notebook here, you could make up a notebook here. I am working on putting this together in a book. It's going to take me a while to get that done with all of the instructions, but I'm working on it, and there's just a lot of information in there. If you were to print off all of those or even just save them to your laptop, you will never run out of a Scrappy Block idea. You'll always have something to work with. Now let's review this block that I just showed you here a minute ago. So these are all, they're going to be we pulled 2-inch squares in mediums and lights, and they're going to finish in the block at 1.5 inches. This center block here is a 4.5-inch square. These right here were initially 3.5-inch squares, so I pulled 2 of each of those. These were also 3.5-inch squares, and I pulled 2 of each of those. And when I made my half square triangle, and I show you how to do half square triangles and what size squares you need to pull from your Speedy Solutions in a video that teaches you all about how to do that. There's so many different techniques that you can use or create using your Speedy Solutions scrap stash. And so that's how I've made these half square triangles. And this is basically a square and a square. So we're taking smaller squares, cutting them on the diagonal, and sewing them around a large square. So that's how this one was created. These were half square triangle units. They were created by placing the light on top the dark, right sides together, draw a diagonal line, sew 1/4 inch on both sides, cut on the drawn line, press them open, square them up to the right size, whatever your pattern calls for. And then you have, with every 2 fabrics, with every light, dark square, you end up with 2 half square triangles. So you're going to go to your scrap stash, and it looks like we have 2, 4, it looks like we have 16 of the mediums, 16 of the light 2-inch squares, and then you would take that times however many blocks you decide you want to make for your quilt, and you would pull that many of the light 2-inch squares, you'd pull that many of the medium 2-inch squares, and the same goes for the large middle dark square, these light larger square and a square that you're using, and also for the half square triangles. So you're pulling those from your stash. Now, notice something here. I mentioned earlier about clean and muddy scraps. So let's talk about that for a minute. So using this same block here, you'll notice in the light fabrics especially, it's always very noticeable with the light fabrics. These light fabrics that surround this navy blue, they're more of a muddy light because they have more of a yellow undertone. These light fabrics here around these, in the half square triangles, they are more of a clean fabric because they have a white background. Here we have a few very white blocks that jump out at us. This one is a muddy one, a muddy one, a muddy one, and when I say muddy, they have more of a yellow undertone. This one is a clean one with a white undertone. So if you take a look at these fabrics right here, if you think about muddy fabrics they have more of a yellow, beigey undertone. They have more of that primitive look to them. And these right here are all more of a muddy undertone to them. These are all more of a clean undertone to them. They have a white, a very distinctive white undertone, very clean and crisp. This is warm and soft, if you will. So it really depends on you and what you like to do when you're making scrappy quilts. You may not like to mix up your clean and muddy fabrics. I personally love it. When I make scrappy quilts, I use it all. I don't necessarily stick with one the clean, all clean undertones or all muddy undertones. As you can see, I mix them up. I think the scrappier, the better. But if you don't care for that, then you're just going to want to be aware of this fact, the clean and the muddy. And then when you're going through your stash and choosing your fabrics, make sure that you choose either all muddy or all clean undertones. And one of the things that you'll find with your scrap stash, if you have personally gone out and bought most of your scraps or most of your fabric, I should say, and you get it scrapped up, you're going to find that your fabrics are either mostly clean or mostly muddy because that's what you prefer. And those are the fabrics that you are drawn to. And so your scrap quilts will probably be mostly like that. Now, in my case, I receive so many free fabrics from people. They're always giving me bags and boxes of fabrics. In fact, I have a couple of bags of fabric that I've just recently received. They came from an estate sale, and I thought I might do a video on them and just show you how I use them. Some of the fabrics I will not use in quilts because it's either too old or just not something that I would want to use in a quilt. But I'm going to show you how all of that can be used somehow, and it doesn't have to end up in the landfill. All right, so everything that I'm sharing with you today is either a block from my 52-week series of blocks, or it's from a quilt that I have made, and there will be a YouTube video that corresponds to the block. And so I will link all of that below. This happens to be a huge block that I made during my mystery quilts from a year ago, this past spring. It was called Dutchman's Crossing. And this one was done very scrappy, as you can see. And so it's a 9-patch. It's basically 9 patches in 9 patches. And I've used some medium fabrics here. I've used some very dark fabrics in the center and some dark fabrics in 2 of the outside 9-patch corners. And then we have used some mediums in the rest of it. So medium, 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 and medium. And then the rest of the 4 pieces within the block are lights. Now you will notice that some of the lights are very clean, and some of the lights have more of a muddy undertone to them here and here. And here again, let's see, here's some more muddy in there. And I still love the block. When you put the whole quilt together, it's still very beautiful. The light still appears light, the mediums still appear medium, and the darks still appear darks. And I just love using everything in my stash, as I've mentioned. Here is the second block that was being used in that mystery quilt. It was a very simple one, and it makes up a beautiful queen size. So hopefully you'll check that out. I'll have the link in the description box below for you. Now here, I'm simply using specific fabrics, and these were chunks of fabric that I had in my scraps. And I had enough for these mediums. There's 4 or 3 different fabrics here, but I had enough to be able to use those in those medium spots within the quilt. And I had about 3 or 4 of these dark blacks, which is what I was able to use in the entire quilt in the dark placement. And then I had some of these lights here. And predominantly it was this same cream, but there was another cream fabric that it was a print on print, but it was more of a muddy undertone. And so you can see it's another scrappy quilt because there are different pieces being used, but it looks beautiful together. First, I just wanted to share with you, in some cases with quilts that I make, I'm simply using fabric that comes from a line of fabric. In fact, this quilt here that I made, it's called Freedom. I made it about 8-9 years ago. The line of fabric came from Shipshewana, Indiana, from an Amish store there. So I'm excited every time I look at this. It's really fun to think about that trip to visit Shipshewana. But the choice in those fabrics and everything that I chose there was from a specific line of fabric. And here on the quilt that's thrown over the back of the couch, that is a quilt that literally I pulled reds, whites, and blues from my scrap stash. And as you can see, some of the scraps have a more yellow undertone in the lights, and some of those light fabrics have a very crisp, clean white undertone to them. I do love to mix and match my scrappy quilts. I don't necessarily always keep it all clean or all muddy, but that is something that I'll share a little bit more about here in just a minute. And this quilt is another patriotic quilt that I have, and I'm using a number of different lights in there that are both from the clean and the muddy family. As I mentioned earlier, I do love to mix and match my scrappy quilts. All right, so I just took you upstairs just to show you some of the quilts that I have hanging currently in various areas of my home. And some of them I'm using both muddy and clean fabrics. Some of them I am using from a particular line of fabric. There's so much you can do, and don't limit yourself. Have fun. Quilting should be a really enjoyable craft, and so hopefully you are having fun as you're quilting. Here is one now that I do have a YouTube channel that teaches you how to do this. This particular quilt, it's called Irish Dresden's, and it's in my patterns book. It's in the very back of the book. It's a beautiful, beautiful quilt, a very happy quilt. As you can see, there are two blocks, the Dresden block or the Irish chain here. And with the Irish chain, so I'm pulling bright squares here, bright 2.5-inch squares that were used for this block. But I also went to my strip stash and I pulled 2.5-inch lights for the strips within this Irish chain. So it is really important that you do have strips cut up in your stash. Sometimes your strips might only be 12 or 15 or 20 inches long, and that's fine. You can still use them in different blocks. And some of these strips have more of a muddy undertone. Some of them have a pure white undertone, but they look beautiful. It's a really happy quilt. Here I'm using a background that has more of a pale yellow. This one's a really soft yellow. And this has some really bright fabrics that are popping up along with the whites. And so that and then of course the big fat blue circles make it a very, very happy quilt. And it's a great scrap buster. I did do some fancy feathers and ruler work on the border there, which really does help add to, when you're just putting on plain borders, it really helps to make it a little bit more interesting. But this was a really fun quilt. Now let's look at a few more blocks. All right, so here are a few more blocks for you. These, again, are all part of my 52-week series of blocks. So you're welcome to go out there and pull the PDFs for any of these that you would like. You'll notice in this one, it's all 2.5-inch squares that finish at 2 inches in the block. And of course, there's a few half-square triangles that were created. You'll notice I use some muddy fabrics and I use some clean fabrics here. And so you'll see that throughout. I often mix mine up just like this. I love to do that. You'll notice that I have some batiks in here. You'll notice that I have some Christmas fabrics in here. You'll notice I have, I mix up seasons. I mix Christmas and Halloween and fall and baby quilt. I mix all of that. Batiks, quilting cottons, plain fabrics. I mix it all. I use it all. You might not like to do that. Maybe you want to use only quilting cottons or prints and make scrappy quilts with just that. Maybe you want your batiks just to be used for batik scrappy quilts. That is your choice. This is your scrap stash. You use it the way you see fit. For me personally, I love using it all, and I absolutely do. And when I'm making my scrappy quilts, I love using two different blocks to create some unique designs where secondary designs pop out at you. So take advantage of that. Here's another one where I am pulling some pinks various pinks from my stash, and these were strips which I snowballed on the ends here with some lights. And it looks like most of the lights that I used here were predominantly the clean, and I used different greens, I used different pinks, and just had fun making that block. This is one of those 52-week series blocks. Here's another one. Here I'm using some dark blacks, and I grabbed some of the plainer ones for this one. You certainly don't have to. But just had fun creating a beautiful block here with squares. And I think these were 2.5-inch squares, and they're going to finish 2 inches in the block. If you have some novelty fabrics and you really don't want to, you need to have a block where you can actually focus on that particular fabric, like this dog fabric here. This is a great pattern. This is one of my 52-week series of blocks, and I would highly recommend that you grab it and use it. You might have a number of different focus fabrics like this, where you really don't want to cut them up any smaller. You want them nice and large so you can actually see what is in there. They're kind of a novelty type fabric, and so this would be a great pattern for you to use that. And of course, in this, I'm using my strip stash, and I made some half square triangles, and then the great big square in the middle. You can obviously make this any size you want. It could be as large or as small as you'd want that block to be. All right, so I'm going to show you 2 more quilts here, and that'll finish out this little clip on how I choose scraps. But this is kind of an interesting one. This is a mystery quilt. Both of these quilts that I'm going to show you is a mystery quilt from 2020. I actually am using the same block for both of these quilts, and you'll see the second one here in a minute, but they look completely different. On this particular quilt, here is the block right up here. It's a 9-patch. There's a couple of half-square triangles, and the rest of them are just squares. But I'm laying out each block in diagonal rows, and I've simply chose some beautiful pastel florals that I found in my stash, and I thought they're beautiful. I'm going to just go ahead and use them in this quilt. So everything is some sort of a floral, and then I did use more muddy colors in the creams for the diagonal rows. And it's a beautiful, I love to teach pieced borders on all of my mystery quilts. So this has a pieced X border. Now let me show you the other quilt using this same block, but it turned out completely different. All right, this is the second quilt. It is the same 9-patch right up here. That's the block, same block. But I did twist each block in each row in order to accent a portion of it. And the lights then encircled the darks instead of creating the diagonal rows. Same block, but a completely different look. And that's what is so fun about scrap quilts. You can do so much in a quilt by just simply rearranging the blocks, turning the blocks, rearranging where you place the different values, lights, mediums, and darks within the block. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel today and visiting with me here in my quilt studio. I hope you've enjoyed what I presented to you today on how I choose the scraps for each of my blocks and my quilts. It is really a fun process, and that's part of the fun of creating the quilts, is just choosing the fabrics for it. I wanted to also point out on this second quilt here from my mystery quilt from 2020, there is a pieced border. It's the half diamond border. And you can find both of those mystery quilts out on my blog, on my website. Just do a search in 2020 mystery quilt and you'll be able to find it. The patterns are out there for you. They are free patterns. So it might be something you might want to create for both for July as well as for the summertime, using the beautiful floral scrap fabrics as well. And if you are looking for a book set on how to get your scrap stash cut, sorted, and organized, I'll have this linked below, as well as the video that corresponds to this. And it will walk you through step by step how to get your scraps cut, sorted, and organized so that you can have a wonderful scrap stash ready and waiting for you to make some beautiful scrappy quilts. So again, thank you so much for joining me today. If you do like the content that I provide, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. That really does help my channel to grow and get out to other quilters just like yourself. And I really appreciate that so much. Thank you. And until next week, happy quilting.